Oysters by Christine Trollope. I'm told you are fond of oysters. I looked up from the contemplation of the glass of gleaming pale gold sherry in my hand and met the even more charming sight of Monique, curled like a kitten on the sofa opposite me. "Who?" I asked, a little startled. "Who told you that?" "Rebecca, of course," she answered, smiling deliciously. "Who else could it have been?" Of course, Rebecca knew my tastes. We had dined and wined for almost 6 months in all the better-class hostelries within a 20-mile radius. Life in a provincial town, however pretty, can be dull. In fact, the prettier the duller, and both the prettiness and dullness of Glenhurst were reflected in its young ladies. I should know. I think I must have tried them all. Rebecca was the last, and the most passable. She was almost beautiful in her dark, sombre way, and she was a good listener, and intelligent. It might, in the ordinary way, have lasted as long as a year, but Rebecca sounded her own knell when she introduced me to Monique de la Fontaine, French by birth and English by adoption, actress, artist, writer, with half a lifetime of travel and experience behind her, and still young and lovely. Small and soft as thistledown, with long blonde hair and laughing grey eyes. She had met Rebecca at some party in London, and had confided to her that she wanted somewhere quiet, without any possibility of distraction, to finish her latest book. What better place could there be, Rebecca had suggested, than our sleepy little town? You couldn't be distracted there if you wanted to be. I rather thought she was wrong in this case, but that was after I met Monique. She found her a flat over a shop in a steep little street in the shadow of the Abbey, and took me along to help move furniture about. One look at the newcomer, and I would have moved 5 divans and 7 wardrobes from one end of town to the other if she had asked me to. Actually, she didn't. Rebecca did most of the work, and when she ran out to buy some nails to hang Monique's pictures, I seized the opportunity to ask Monique to dine with me that same night. I did not, after all, have any definite arrangement with Rebecca. And now, scarcely a week later, I was sitting at Monique's invitation in a flat transformed, not only by her taste, but by the very glow of her presence, awaiting a dinner which my short acquaintance with this amazing woman told me would be exquisite. The future, both long-term and short, was star-studded. "Well," asked Monique, breaking into my reverie again, "are you?" I'm sorry, I was just looking at you. Am I what?" "Fond of oysters." "Oh, they're my favourite dish." "So Rebecca said. I've got a treat for you, then. You're going to start your dinner with a dozen of them. I had them specially sent up from the coast today, and I've had them on crushed ice for the last 2 hours. She drained her sherry glass and looked up. "Go sit at the table. I'll bring them." I did as she told me, admiring the snowy cloth and the sparkling glass and cutlery. In a moment she was back with a plate and a tall, slim bottle. Not champagne, you see. Dry white wine. I smiled approval, and she sat opposite me and filled my glass and hers from the delicately misted bottle. The fresh sea scent of the oysters wooed my nostrils. There was thin brown bread and butter, and slices of lemon all ready to squeeze. "Oysters," I purred, "the rich man's delight." And yet Dickens said, do you remember, that oysters and poverty always seem to go together. Times have changed. She laughed, and the corners of her eyes crinkled impishly. If we are quoting, I think I can give you an older one. It's James I who's supposed to have said he was a bold man who first swallowed an oyster. Then he didn't know what he was talking about. There's nothing more natural or delightful. Man was made for oysters, and oysters were made for man. I took a shell reverently in my fingers, seasoned the contents lightly, squeezed a piece of lemon, and tilted my head back. The oyster slid cool and caressing down my throat. I waited a moment. Too much haste would have been sacrilege, and then sipped my wine. It was perfect. Then I noticed that she was not eating. "Don't you like them?" I asked. "Yes, I like them, but I won't have one for now. I got them for you, Julian." It was the first time she had called me by my name, and the pleasure of it thrilled down my spine. "Has Rebecca told you a lot about me?" "Oh, yes. We've talked about you for hours." Her grey eyes held a suspicion of mockery, which made me feel slightly uncomfortable. To keep myself in countenance, I said, "Of course she told me a lot about you, too." "Did she? Well, what, for instance?" The mockery was still there. "Well, the stories you can tell, and that you'd tell me one if I asked you. Tell me a story, Monique." She laughed again. The mockery was gone, and it was the pure, happy laughter of a child, but there was something else there, too, the delighted triumph of a child that had been playing a game with itself and won. "All right," she answered. "Why not?" She sat with the shaded lamp making a halo of her bright hair, and her light, beautiful voice flowed like a stream over pebbles. I swallowed oysters and listened. "I'll tell you a story," she began, "which I heard from my mother. It happened a long time ago, when she was quite a young woman, before I was born, and of course it's true." She raised her glass to her lips and looked over at me for a moment. "She lived at that time," she went on, "in an old stone cottage in a small village, hidden away among the mountains in the centre of France. There was another cottage just like it next door, and in this second cottage there lived a couple with one little girl, a charming child, perhaps 8 years old, certainly no more. They were poor people, but very respectable. I think the man worked on one of the farms, a shepherd or something like that. My mother was poor too. Life at that time and in that part of France was primitive." I put down the shell I had just picked up and stared at the beautiful, elegant creature opposite me. "You don't believe me, do you?" She gave me a direct, suddenly unsmiling look. I nodded, and she rewarded me with a smile. "Because life was primitive, there was a lot of disease. Obscure, wasting illnesses, infections, tuberculosis, I don't know. Those people were uncivilized by your standards and mine, and they didn't worry much about germs, and it wouldn't have helped them much if they did. Anyway, the young woman next door to my mother fell suddenly ill with a high fever. My mother did her best, but the poor girl lay for 2 days, moaning and muttering, and recognizing no one, not even her little daughter. And on the 3rd day, when everyone had decided it was time to fetch the doctor from the other side of the mountain, she died. My mother had seen death before, and did not shrink from the sight of it, so while the unhappy husband made the long journey on foot to arrange for the funeral, that was of the first importance, however poor you were, she busied herself with laying her neighbour out, and when she had finished, the poor woman made a corpse worth seeing, lying there so still and peaceful in her best white nightgown, with her hair neatly braided and her rosary between her clasped hands. My mother was nothing if not an artist. Now, the little girl, I think her name was Roseanne, had been under my mother's roof for 2 days. She was a quiet, good child, and no trouble at all. But now my mother, you must understand, who was a pious woman, realized it was time for Roseanne to return and pay her respects to the dead. So she took the child by the hand and gently led her next door. "Kneel, little one," she said, "and pray that Our Lady may take your mother's soul into paradise. I shall come back and fetch you later." Then, because she had a pot-au-feu that might burn if it were not stirred, she went back to her own house and left the girl to her devotions. I could contain myself no longer. "Do you mean," I interrupted, "that she left that poor child alone with... My dear Julian," replied Monique, "we are not as squeamish as you. That child had seen her grandmother die, and had even helped to lay out the body. No, she was not afraid to approach her mother. In fact, I suppose that was the main reason for what happened next." She paused, and by now I was completely under the spell of that hypnotic voice. "And what did happen next?" I said. "For most of the time, you understand, my mother was not in the room, but she heard it all, as you will see from Roseanne herself, and there was no reason to suppose that the girl was not telling the truth. When my mother had gone out, Roseanne knelt obediently at the bedside and said a paternoster and several aves. Then she got to her feet and began to look about her. She had been told not to stir until she was fetched, and she was, as I have said, a good child, but she was bored, naturally, and because it was her mamma laying dead, and because she was only 8, she cried a little. A tear fell on the corpse's cold cheek, and without thinking, she stooped and licked it off. It tasted quite pleasant. Then suddenly she thought she saw another of her tears at the corner of her mother's eye. She licked and went on licking, and the cool, salt taste continued for a long time. She liked it. She breathed deeply, and her mouth seemed to fill with the coolness and saltiness. It was delicious. She felt something glutinous and tough was lying against her teeth. She bit ecstatically and felt the cool salt taste slipping sweetly down her throat. At that moment my mother came in to fetch the child, but she came to a sudden halt just inside the door, crying out despite herself with astonishment. One of the eyes of the corpse was missing. "Good God!" I said. I felt a little sick. Monique, as a storyteller, was more than convincing. But what did she do? I mean, your mother, did she scream, faint, what? My mother? Never. She took Roseanne by the hand and asked what had happened, and Roseanne told her what I have just told you. How terrible! And I suppose she hurried the child away and sent for help? Oh, no. My mother was like me. She believed that no chance of a new experience should ever be wasted. And there was still the other eye. Through a mist, I saw Monique's smiling face. She was holding out a plate to me. "Dear Julian," she was beseeching, "do have the last oyster."